Hello and welcome to Unacademy. As part of your Hindu analysis today, we'll be discussing 7 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper, both Delhi and international edition. But before we begin, 2 to 3 very important announcements for you. First, on popular demand and the fact that after prelims we are there for you. If anybody wants to go for a 15 months course and a guided program with us, the 24,999, which is 24,999 offer price is back. So you can use this to create a certain regime for yourself through which you can ace this examination. The next batch is starting on 8th of July. So I hope you are going to become a part of that. After this, you already know that we have already covered 3 sessions on this. This is the Conquer Mains program. But because of popular demand, the first 6 sessions are on YouTube for free. Every day at 10 p.m. in the night, these sessions are getting uploaded. I hope you've already gone through Shyam sir's session on Indian economy, then Mukesh sir's session on geography. Hima Bindu ma'am yesterday uploaded on science and technology, where she discussed 6 to 7 very important articles and topics related to the concept of science and tech. Today, I'll be there with you in the night at 10 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. And the idea is very simple. When I'm going to cover history, the session is about modern India, and we'll talk about and we'll discuss about, for example, the concept of foundation of British Raj in India, and we'll discuss the conceptual aspects. As you know, modern India is both relevant for prelims and mains, but we'll discuss the conceptual aspects so that we understand the ideas before the examination well, so that you can answer any question in GS paper 1. So do remember, and tomorrow Sarmat sir is going to be there with polity, and then Chetan sir on 6th of July, the last session. After this, it will move to the app. So do register on the app also. And under the offer price, this has also become a 999 rupees course. So you can also enroll in it for just 1000 rupees. With this, let's look at one more interesting thing, which is July Carnival. The July Carnival of optionals is now on and is live. So with the code AMOPT, you can get 50 to 60% discount on the course fee for a history optional course, which we have already only covered 7 to 8 classes. It's a 360-hour program. We are meeting every day at 1 p.m. I have already provided 5 to 6 notes. The students, I don't allow them to, or I don't ask them to read any books. The idea is everything is in the notes. You just have to come to the class. The annotated PPT and the notes are going to be enough. So we have dedicated mapping sessions, and if you have any doubt, you can join the Telegram channel and you will figure it out, or we'll figure it out together. So in the last session on 1st of July, when we met, I gave you 2 questions to discuss or to decode. Most of you given the right answer here, wherein we discussed the concept of police custody and judicial custody and the concept of certain flora and fauna which has been found in India. Here most of you given the right answer, which is 2 only. In judicial custody, you are not in the police station, you are in jail. So the location of judicial custody is incorrect here. You're not put into the police station lockup, but rather in the jail. And this is totally correct, that the police cannot interrogate a person in judicial custody without the permission of the judge. So here 2 only is the right answer. And this was the new species of turmeric which was found in 2023. Which state or UT we had to find? And the answer to that question was Manipur. So both the second statement there and here, Manipur is the right answer. 100% of you got the right answer. The response was also quite good. I again have 3 to 4 very important mains questions for you here and 1 prelims question for you, so that we will discuss it tomorrow for the session on 5th July. So with this, let's start our discussion for today, which is first factory acts and factory reform in that sense. Thereafter, a very interesting case of adulteration but through motor oil. Then we'll talk about the issue which is emerging in Europe, which is the rise of the far right. We'll discuss this, has a lot of ramifications, has a lot of historical context. We'll discuss this. Then we'll talk about a very interesting study which has been done in the Lancet, which is related to the concept of how death rates are changing with spike in PM 2.5 or particulate matter 2.5 levels. We'll discuss this also. The smart city program going forward, an amphibious program which did not ever go forward in Kerala. And last but not the least, this is going to be interesting. This meeting is going to happen, but it has finally been decided that the 46th UNESCO Heritage Panel is going to meet in India in Bharat Mandapam, Delhi. So we'll discuss all of these topics in the next hour or so. So let's start our first important article, which is Factory Accidents, a pointer to rusty inspection reform. Now, the idea here is that, one second, I need to change the, okay, let it be like this only, right. Now, we know that in 2016, in 2018, in 2020 and in 2023, there have been multiple such accidents, fatal accidents in 3 to 4 very important industrial zones in that sense, wherein Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu are such zones which have whole sectors which are based on industrial zones, and therefore there have been multiple fatal accidents in these states, specifically in Maharashtra, where the government has even failed to relocate certain people out of the neighborhood in the chemicals factory to a place which was already decided by the state assembly in 2022. So, the article basically is pointing about two very important things. First, the fact that when it comes to factory accidents, we have a whole history of factory based issues, and factory reforms is something which is quite important, and it does not give you the quantum of the issues, but when it comes to industrial accidents from Bhopal gas tragedy to the recent ones, the fatality and the level of impact to the neighborhood is quite big. And because these are chemical factories, the chemicals leach into the water, and this can stay there for at least 10 to 15 years. Therefore, the people are not safe in that locality. Now, what this article actually points out is that all of this can be avoided through proper inspection. So, factory accidents are something which are quite common in India. As of right now, we have multiple major accidents which are happening, but the inspection regime in India is problematic. This is very important for you. GS paper 3, this would be very, very important, because when it comes, we will talk about an ILO regulation also, which is the concept of a certain clause which is given in the International Labour Organization code in that regard of 1947, and we'll also say how does it link up with the other aspects in that regard. So, the first thing which it actually says, one second, yes, now I can change this, yeah. So, the first thing which it talks about is the rate or percentage of the inspections which are happening in India. So, it basically divides it under two heads. One is the inspection of hazardous factories, and the second one is general inspection rate of factories. Now, you would know that when it comes to corporates, when it comes to any form of private body, they are more profit oriented, and therefore, when it comes to compliance to certain rules or regulations, there can always be a way in which they can cut corners, and therefore, inspection is a deterrent. The deterrent regime is that you create a fear that there can be inspection, and therefore, inspections are important. You cannot always trust a private actor with the safety of the workers, which is more important, because here what is happening is the industrial accidents are not only killing the workers, that is the first problem, but also the environment and the ecosystem around it. And therefore, if there is, for example, a factory which is using lead arsenic too much, and that in turn leads to leaching of that, because there are certain corners which have been cut, it could in turn lead to the water of that sector becoming poisonous for at least 15 to 20 to 30 years, and that ways inspection is important. Now, it gives us this data for 3 or rather 4 states specifically, because the industrial zones for this is quite important: Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, the 3 centers, and for the all India level. So, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, the recent 3 major accidents have happened in this sector, and it gives you all India level data also, hazardous factories and inspection rate in factories generally. Now here the percentages are quite dismal, 23% of all factories which were there in Maharashtra which have hazardous chemicals related to it have only been checked, meaning if there were 100 factories, only 23. So out of all the factories, only 23% have been checked. When it comes to general inspection rate, it is very, very low, meaning out of all factories in Maharashtra, only 8% were checked in the past 1 year. Thereafter, in Tamil Nadu, this number is bigger, which is 25% check for hazardous factories, and again the inspection rate numbers are also better than Maharashtra, 17%. And when it comes to Gujarat, it is constant, which is 19% here, 19% here, and all India level we have 26% here, 14% here. So the percentages are not very encouraging generally, meaning only 26% of all factories in India which have hazardous factories are being inspected, and out of all factories in India only 14% are inspected. This is quite dangerous because this means that more than 80%, in certain cases more than that also 90% of the factories are actually under the mercy of the private body and his so-called third party inspectors. This number you obviously do not have to learn, don't learn this, but please create an idea in your mind that when it comes to inspections, it is not a very good number. This is very discouraging. It is a concern that when it comes to numbers, the numbers are not adding up to make it encouraging, and therefore inspection in India has been a problem. Now, if inspection rates are like this, what are the reasons? What are the reasons? And the first and the foremost is low appointment rates, which is that in most of the departments across the labor department across these states, there is a shortage. There is a shortage of officers, and over and above that, even if there are officers, there is very high workload. So this is basically a consequence of low appointment rates in that regard. With shortage of officers, a single officer is expected to go through close to 500 to, in certain cases 300, in certain cases 700 factories, which is physically impossible that way, and that is why the low compliance rate of just 8% that way, that only 8% in Maharashtra are actually checked. That way, this is a very what we call as cyclical problem, structural problem, a problem which is within the labor department of the states itself and overall in India. Now the idea that why are we not recruiting, they have advertised either there are red tapeism, either there are bottlenecks. The problem is they have created a certain regime in which this is not prioritized. So the first issue is that we have very low inspection rates, but the reasons are based on manpower shortage itself. But the question is, are we then trying to do reform? Because labor reform is extremely important and is mandated. Now under the ILO, what we call as International Labour Organization's Labour Inspection Convention 081, which is a section of 1947, it actually says directly that sufficient qualified, well provided inspectors shall be there for labour inspection and factory inspection, and they shall enter the establishment freely without prior notice at any time to secure due compliance of labour laws, amongst others. So the idea is that this is mandated and India is a signatory of this convention, and therefore we are in gross violation of this because of this, because we do not have the trained personnel, we do not have the trained well skilled labour, they are not well provided, and the workload on them is unhumanly. And therefore, what we are doing as of right now is we have factories which are impacting and having a lot of environmental and a human resource impact, and further there is low inspection rate, there is low appointment rate, which is in turn leading to very high workload, which is creating a regime in which we are in gross violation of the ILO convention in that regard. Now, have we tried to reform? And therein lies the other problem, that whatever reforms have been done by the governments in the past 2 years or in the past 2 decades or in the past, at least if you take for such reforms, the time scale should be at least 15-20 years. It is all about self-certification in the wrong direction, wherein you are giving the private actor more and more freedom to do self-certification. And you really think that in India, anybody is not going to ever give themselves a compliance certificate if they want to cut corners. Randomized inspections, this is the rate is so low that it happens 5 years one time. Further, online inspections, they only show certain parts of the factory which are compliant. And third party certification, where bribes are quite common and corruption is quite common. So the idea is whatever reform has come in labor reform specifically with regards to inspection, it is all in the wrong direction. And the argument is we have to stop what is called the concept of Inspector Raj. Inspector Raj is something which we are trying to remove. See, we understand that when it comes to India, these inspectors could be corrupt, these inspectors could be taking bribes, and these are issues which persist. But that does not mean that you don't create a regime in which there is no compliance on the part of the government itself. Everything has to be done by the private actor. That way, you are going to the other extreme. If you are at one extreme that you are giving inspectors too much power, then you are reaching the other extreme where you are not even trying to create a certain regime in which they fear the inspectors. And ironically, even if the companies are found in violation, the prosecution rate is at 6%, meaning out of all cases which go to your labor department, only 6% get prosecuted. And therefore, the idea is that nobody fears these inspectors also. So, from a period in which inspectors were a nuisance, we are at a point where inspectors are useless. So, therefore, there are 3 to 4 things which the article is pointing out at the same point of time. First is the low rate of, I am trying to consolidate so that you can write it in an answer, low rate of inspection. This is the first issue which is flagged. With low rate of inspection, the problem which comes through at the same point of time is why, and the reason for that is low appointment rate and heavy workload. And is this in violation of ILO convention? ILO convention is not followed. At the same point of time, the reforms which have been brought in are in the direction of self-based certification and inspection, and therefore what they are doing is they are creating a regime in which the companies have too much power. Now, what is the logic for this? Logic is we don't want to give too much power to the inspector. It is to reduce the power of the inspector because they have a chance to be corrupt. But we have gone into the opposite spectrum itself where they have become toothless. And therefore, the idea is Inspector Raj, we are now in a self-compliance Raj, and in between all of this is the labor and the people who live in and around these factories who are facing day-to-day issues, labor death, people's health impacts over a long period of time is all being in a way ignored, and therefore what we need to do is either increase the rate of inspection or make our inspectors in a way more compliant to their ethics, but also at the same point of time give them some power. Now, how will the UPSC ask a question out of this topic? This: the recurrent industrial accidents are indicative of a poor inspection and compliance regime. Do you agree? Now, you can't write this answer if you have no idea about this whole process, which is with low inspection rate, there will be a lot of issues which will come in. And the reforms till this point in the past decade or so have not been very, very encouraging, and there's a blatant violation of ILO and even human rights here in that regard. So, I hope you will be able to write this answer with the fodder which we've provided in this article. Now, let's move to the next one, a quite interesting one. Ironically, it is linked up with a certain event which recently happened on 7th June, and this article is out of from the archives, and it tells you how India has changed also, but India has also not changed, which is the article of July 4th, 1974 was about how edible oil adulteration is happening in India, and the audacity at this point of time which the adulterators had was they were actually adulterating oil with motor oil itself, whatever what we call as the engine oil which used to be extracted from cars during service, that was refined and sold to the highest bidder who could refine it and add it to edible oil. So, close to 250 such petrol stations were found which used to take out the motor oil and sell it to the highest bidder who could then refine it and add it to the edible oil at that point of time. So, close to 4,000 liters of used oil was actually added, and that way it's quite scary that in edible oil, for example, refined oil or even dalda or at that point of ghee, these things were added. Now, does it mean that we have come a very long way and there is no form of adulteration in India? Again, not true, and therein lies the World Food Safety Day 2024, which happened on 7 June. It happens every year on 7 June since 2019, but the theme was quite interesting. Theme was food safety, prepare for the unexpected. Looks like a thematic of, for example, not actually a World Food Safety Day, but of a certain disaster which is coming in that regard, which is prepare for the unexpected. It's like a movie title more than actually a theme, but this now creates a lot of questions for us. And therein lies the discussion which I want to have with you, which is food safety, what is the form of adulteration which is happening, and how do we link this adulteration with the palm oil production which is happening as of right now. There is a lot of conversation about palm oil, we will have that discussion. So, this is a feature which I always take from the archives, a very interesting one. Tomorrow most probably we will have a very important article on American independence, because July 4th, which is their Independence Day. So, tomorrow for sure we will have a conversation about American independence. So, I will try to make it about American Revolution also. So, the World Food Safety Day is an initiative to eliminate, reduce, control and also make sure that food-borne illnesses are actually eliminated. So, there are multiple risks because of adulteration. Adulteration is the process of mixing of food with things which should not be added to food because it is for consumption. So, it is to reduce and eliminate and control food-borne illness risk in that regard. And since 2019, on June the 7th, the World Food Safety Day is commemorated. A very recent development that is. Now, when it comes to India, as of right now, there is an issue. The issue is that our edible oil consumption is so high that we cannot actually meet it through our internal production. So, though between 2015 and 2021, which is the past data we have or the most reliable data we have, there has been a 44% increase in oilseed production from 25 million tons to 36 million tons. Still, our edible oil domestic demand is not met, and therefore, in most cases we are importing edible oil. But when we are importing edible oil, the problem is that in order to keep the costs down or have a higher margin in a market like India, they are adulterating the oil, for example, mustard oil, sarson ka tel, with rice bran oil, argan oil, which are much more cheaper, But a mixture, a concoction of mustard oil with rice bran oil or the other oils is a very dangerous combination for our health. In that regard, trans fats are very, very high, cholesterol levels go over. Once heated, mostly it becomes like poison. But the problem as of right now is that most adulteration does not happen with even rice bran oil. It happens with palm oil. Palm oil is a very big question which is in front of humanity as of right now. And when it comes to palm oil is in everything. UPSC asked a question also about this, from toothpaste to mouthwash to lipstick to face wipes to food to ice creams. There's a whole palm oil based production or palm oil based industry when it comes to ice creams, there's a new word which has been used, which is it should be a frozen dessert and not an ice cream, because desserts don't have oil in them. Rather, palm oil is added to create chocolates, candy, nutrition bars, you name it, palm oil is there. Palm oil that way is added to most of the products which we consume day to day. Now, the concerns with palm oil are, firstly, when palm oil is added to most of these products, what happens is that it has a certain chemical reaction with the chemicals which are added, for example, toothpaste or lipstick, and therefore it is generally dangerous to use palm oil on the skin or for food production. But palm oil has two other issues also. One is the health issue, wherein it has been argued that high levels of palm oil production consumption can lead to cancer. There are issues that it leads to heart diseases, because that way it has a very high cholesterol content. Most of the lifestyle diseases which we have today and the consequent health impacts are because of very high palm oil production and palm oil consumption in that sense. But the other one is that palm oil is produced nowadays mostly in the Southeast Asian sector, Indonesia and the whole of Southeast Asian sector, even Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. They are deforesting their major ecological zones to produce palm oil. So, palm oil production, there's one more issue which is deforestation. In order to create palm oil farms or plantations, what they're doing is they're deforesting most of their major reserves in that regard, and palm oil as a crop is also not good for the soil, because it's quite high fertility based. It takes out the fertility very quickly, and with deforestation comes the issue of biodiversity. So today, palm oil based adulteration, you want to call it, or addition into basic day to day needs, and over and above that edible oil, is creating both health issues and ecological impact. It is not a good crop, generally perceived to be that way is quite dangerous for the environment and your health or my health. Now, we know that palm oil is added to most of these products, and the question is, if that is the case, why aren't we moving to other oils? So, what we've established till this point is adulteration, a story which was there 50 years ago. Now there is no audacity to add at least motor oil in that regard, but we have found other alternatives to make this edible oil consumption meet, and therein we are now contaminating mustard oil or even basic groundnut oil, sesame oil with palm oil. And palm oil has the problem of deforestation and health, and it has a consequent biodiversity impact. Now, the consequences overall are both ecological, health, and the more bigger issue which is emerging is alternatives are not getting encouraged, or in a way we have normalized the palm oil industry and the processes behind it. Now, herein lies a very age-old question: till what point do we have a compromise on environment? Meaning, environment and economics or economic viability always have certain intersections, but there is a trade-off. Till what point can I trade off the environment to increase my economic power, and therein lies the conundrum of palm oil. See, if you see the alternatives of palm oil, for example, soy or rapeseed, the problem as of right now is when palm oil is produced, it is being produced in certain zones which have very high ecological diversity. So, for example, species richness vis-a-vis soy and rapeseed is quite high, double to that of a certain rapeseed based or soy based, where soy and rapeseed oil can be produced. Now, this is the ecological aspect. But the problem is, if we have to produce the same amount of oil, this needs only 2.6 hectares, this needs 2 hectares, this needs 1.25 hectares. And even after putting that into consideration, I can produce 2 to 5 tons in a given space of what we call as palm oil, where these in the same space I will get maximum 1 ton and here maximum 2 tons of oil. And that is why in the same period I will have a major differentiation in production. So, for example, for producing 84.8 million tons of palm oil, I need a smaller space and the production and the yield is higher. On the other hand, for soy and rapeseed, I would have to put in more land for 52.7 million tons of soy oil, or rapeseed oil only 27 tons. That is why there is a difference. There is a major differentiation between these three when it comes to production. It is using less land and is giving us higher yield. Now, this is where the whole issue is. Where palm oil can be produced, soy and rapeseed can't, and where rapeseed and soy can be produced, palm oil can't. And the problem is, because palm oil based production is happening in tropical countries, in very ecologically rich countries, there is a cost of biodiversity. And this is where the whole controversy or the conundrum or the dilemma comes in, that where do you draw the line? And more than that, the industry also has a bigger issue. Palm oil can be sold at a very, very low cost. If it is low cost, it will in turn lead to a market for low cost oil. For example, a local vendor or a certain vendor in a certain industry, for example, McDonald's, or even a major corporate who doesn't really care about sustainability and doesn't really care about your health, will rather go for palm oil than actually go for a better sustainable oil. And therefore, there is no real incentive which is being produced to produce environmentally sustainable palm oil or alternatives. And the alternative issue is that if I buy alternative oils, they are using 9 times more land for producing the same amount of palm oil, and therefore this would even lead to larger or even bigger impact on ecology and destruction of forests in that sense. So, we are basically in a major paradoxical situation, or we're in a conundrum or in a dilemma wherein we don't know what to do here. Because if I go for an alternative oil which is not a non-adulterating but good for your health, it is 9 times more impactful on the environment, and as it is, there is no incentive to go for sustainably developed palm oil because of the price. And though the ecological impact is there, where do I draw the line that is good enough for the oil production? Because oil is, as of right now, a very important part of the dietary supplements or even diet of anybody and everybody on earth. So, this from the archives gave me a entry point into this world of adulteration, and from adulteration we moved into palm oil. Palm oil is a very relevant topic because a lot of questions can come and can be made on adulteration, and this is the type of question which you can expect, which is food safety and adulteration has profound impact on the health of the consumer. Discuss. Now, this is one type of question. You could also make another type of question, which could be that alternatives to palm oil, a major adulterator, have no takers because of the overall economy and impact of them. Do you agree? You can make a question like this also. I can make a specific question on palm oil production. So there can be a GS paper 3 question which could be intersecting both economics and science and technology. So this is where these aspects become important and these articles become important. So from the archives, that way is quite interesting because entry point. Now we move to the third major article and something which should concern all of us, which is the rise of the far right in Europe and its ramification. Now I don't know how good or how introduced you are to or how exposed you are to world history, but if you have any idea about world history, when the word right and Europe come together, you will always come up with a word called Reich. So far right and Europe don't go too well because there was a person who rose there who wanted to produce 1000 years of dominance, which is the Third Reich of Adolf Hitler. Now Europe that way is not the zone where far right parties have done good for the people, and therein lies the entry point into fascism, neo-fascist parties, because most of these parties which are sweeping the different European elections, the latest in France, are actually borderline neo-fascist parties. Now I am not going to presume that you understand the concept of fascism, so I will tell you what is fascism and how neo-fascism, which is new fascism, is different from fascism itself. And please do understand one thing, that this is how it happened in 1929, or rather will say 1919 to 1929, 30-33 period. Exact type of situation is getting created. That is why there is a saying in history, the more the things change, they remain the same, wherein there is a certain wave in Europe which was quite similar to what was happening after the First World War, and that way this is a deja vu moment for a historian. So let's first try to understand what is this issue of far right and what was the last time when far right parties came to power and what was the consequence for that. Now see, in France, Le Pen, coming from the far right party of France, most probably they have gone into a runoff election in that sense, or runoff parliamentary election. Let's see if Macron comes on top. Most probably Le Pen is going to increase her share. But even in the European parliamentary elections, the number of seats of the what we call right-leaning parties have increased from 118 to 131, and the number of left-leaning parties has reduced from 53 to 71. Now please do understand one thing, please don't draw parallels with India or even Asia. Asia has a totally different context, India has a totally different type of democratic system, and when I say left and right, don't use the same left and right vis-a-vis India, because you will start to draw conclusions which will not stand because it's very specific to Europe. Now first thing I want to tell you where this left and right thing comes from. See, left and right have not always meant the concept of socialism and the concept of far right or conservative authorities. Left and right come from the French Revolution, which is the concept that when the people who wanted to change France, which is specifically the ones who wanted the monarchy to go, the Jacobians, they sat on the left side of the National Assembly or the Legislative Assembly as it is called, and the people, the loyalists, the people who wanted the king Louis XVI to be there were sitting on the right, and therefore the concept of left and right comes from here. The people who want change and the people who did not want change were conservative, were loyalists who wanted the king to stay. So the idea was whoever wanted change has been argued that he is a radical in that regard, and therefore the concept of left and right. But now today this is a French Revolution connotation. In 2024 it has a totally different connotation in that sense. A left-leaning party is mostly linked to socialism or the idea of what we call as socialist, communist, Marxist, Leninist ideas, and right would be something wherein you are talking about a conservative party which is status quo, would not like to change a lot of things in society and have their own agendas in that sense. Now left and right is okay. A centralist party sits in the middle, which has both the agendas of the left and the right. The Indian National Congress that was a very good answer. Not the Indian National Congress after independence, before independence. Before independence, the INC had all the three what we call as types of understanding. We had the Congress left or the socialists within the Congress itself, for example, Jawaharlal Nehru or Subhash Chandra Bose. We had the Congress right, who the ones who had a certain understanding of the Indian society and India, which is, for example, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. And we had centralists also, who basically were leaning towards both, had both the agendas. Jawaharlal Nehru moved from a socialist towards a centralist agenda. So that's a good example of how in the same party you can have all three lineations. But in Europe, it has a totally different connotation, because when I say left and right now, it has now taken up a totally different concept because of what happened in Europe after the First World War, which is the rise of fascism. Now, fascists that ways are the worst of the worst when it comes to any political ideology or when it comes to any regime. Now, the word fascism refers to, and please pay attention, refers to certain personalities and parties which rose specifically in the 1920s and were there till the 1940s and 1950s, and thereafter through the process of Cold War politics and whatever happened, which is the cleansing of Europe, they went into hibernation. But there's a certain resurgence of a far right, and therein lies the neo-fascist concept itself. Now, let's first try to define fascism. What is fascism in that regard? Now, if I use the word fascism with a big F, it means fascist ideology. If I use the small f, it basically means the genesis of fascism, which comes from Italy. The Fascista party, Mussolini's party, Benito Mussolini's party was called the fascist party. The word fascist itself comes from what we call a Roman axe. A Roman axe which is made on the flag of the fascist party. It is a symbol of power and authority, is where the word fascist or fascists comes from. Now, fascism has certain features, and the most important feature is ultra nationalism or extreme form of nationalism. See, nationalism is a very healthy process till it does not become a certain dangerous monster, which is called ultra nationalism. See, we have different brands of nationalism. Political nationalism based on ideas, economic nationalism, for example, India economic critique, the idea that economic factors in turn led to nationalistic response. You have cultural nationalism, for example, unification of Germany, Italy, which is culture is used as a way of unification or nation building in that regard. There's also something which rose in Europe between 1820 and 1900, is called rotten nationalism, which is very well in a way summarized by how Serbia used to act, which is the idea that my country is the most important, I will do anything and everything for my nation, and in that regard, it was about fighting with another. It was creating an other. It was about creating an other and aggressive nationalism in that regard. Anything, not domestically, but externally was acceptable. So, killing Archduke Ferdinand was acceptable, killing an Austrian was acceptable, killing other nationality was acceptable because it was an act of nationalism. This is called the era of Balkanization, the era of Balkan nationalism, which is quite dangerous that way because it is based on an aggressive form of nationalism. Still, if I say that there's a counter for nationalism, Balkan nationalism is still 60-70% dangerous if 100% is ultra nationalism. Now, after the First World War, which was based on the processes which had happened through this Balkanization of the Eastern Europe sector, the Balkan nationalism, Serbian politics, Serbia's trigger, in turn a lot of tendencies which has existed in the whole of Europe at that point of time with regards to a lot of secret pacts, and we discussed this in class. There are at least 6 to 7 tendencies which explain the First World War, and therein lies the concept that big powers used to get involved, the great powers used to get involved very quickly into things which were localized. Again, something which is there in the world geopolitics right now, which is even small local issues, you have international actors commenting on that. Now, what happens is that the First World War happens and Germany is humiliated, and that is the genesis of fascism, wherein the Treaty of Versailles, which is the worst of the worst treaties in the world, gave birth to two issues. First, where Italy felt very, very betrayed, that it did not get the Trinotrist area or what was promised to it. It had already lost 7 lakh people to the war, and over and above that, it was in debt. And over and above that, this will be the reason why there will be the rise of Benito Mussolini. Mussolini is going to use this sense of betrayal to come to power, and within the next 10 years, Hitler is going to use the same model which Mussolini created, which is the concept of fascism, and he will make it into Nazism. Nazism is even more dangerous than fascism, because fascism does not have within it racial discrimination, but Nazism has. And now comes in the logic, why did the Treaty of Versailles produce Hitler? What Treaty of Versailles did was it humiliated Germany beyond exception, and therefore people felt betrayed and there was an anger. Now, ultra-nationalism generally rises when there is a lot of anger, disillusionment, and this is not specific to today, but for 1920s and 40s Europe, which is a lot of disillusionment, a lot of anger which has built up within the people, and now comes that one person who's the savior, the man with the iron fist who will solve all the issues. And ultra-nationalism is more dangerous than rotten nationalism or aggressive nationalism is, because ultra-nationalism, what happens is anything and everything is justified in the name of the nation, domestically and externally, wherein the idea that I am ready to die for the nation, but you should be ready to be killed for the nation also. Your existence is above and beyond is not above and beyond the nation. The nation comes first, you second. And therefore, ultra-nationalistic forces generally use a sense of betrayal, the sense of what we call aggressive nationalism, and therein lies the idea that my nationalism defines everything. So, anything, everything is acceptable in the name of nationalism. The nation is supreme, it is the most important. Ultra-nationalists tend to use this anger of the people to do anything and everything. But at that point of time, fascists also had one major agenda, which is called anti-socialists. They were anti-socialists, which is because socialism was a rising phenomenon since 1917 with the Russian Revolution, and the socialistic worldview was the destruction of capitalism. And therein, the West became extremely scared and became extremely anxiety driven on socialists, and therefore what Hitler and even Mussolini do is use this fear of the capitalist to argue that I am your solution. So basically it is believed that capitalism produced Hitler and Mussolini as vanguards, as protectors, but they went out of hand when it came to 1939, when Hitler is going to become too ambitious. So the anti-socialist agenda makes them corporatist also, which is that they are always linked up with the state, and if not the state, at least the capitalist, and they are status quoist, meaning they will generally be very conservative and will always push the agenda of the capitalist, the state, which they want to protect. But at the same point of time, they are based on the cult of a charismatic leader. Therein lies the cult of Mussolini and Hitler, where when Hitler used to speak, people used to cry. Mussolini had his own quirks. He used to made a mockery of all his opposition, and therefore he had a certain image in front of the people which people used to enjoy, which is the cult of the charismatic leader. And therein lies the manipulation part, wherein they are very big manipulators, meaning they will say anything and everything at your face. For example, when Mussolini came to power, he initially said that I will make Italy a republic, but as soon as the Pope became extremely angry with Mussolini, he said, no, fake news, I never said that, I am going to keep it as a constitutional monarchy, along with the fact that the Pope and the King were not very happy with this idea that I will make it a republic. So he pacified the Pope also and the King also. No, I did not say it, that is fake news in the newspaper. That is how they manipulate us, they cannot be trusted, and they are mostly the ones who produce totalitarian states. You have totalitarian states, which is states which control every aspect of your life. So there are other features also, but for the sake of this discussion, ultra-nationalism, anti-socialist, corporatist, conservative, cult of charismatic leader, manipulators, totalitarian states, plus using the media quite well, the fascists come to power. But the problem with fascists is they use democracy to break democracy, which is all they need is a chance. They will enter through democratic processes, and then they will break democracy itself. That is what Mussolini did. Mussolini was given a chance to become the prime minister, and then he broke Italy itself, became the Deuce. And in the same way, Hitler's Nazi party, and the irony of the fact is that Hitler's father was a socialist. He knew that extreme left or right won't work, so his party, Nazi, is the English translation of Nazi is NSDAP, which is National Socialist Democratic Party of Germany, which in turn means that he took a centralist line, but once he became chancellor, he then dissolved the position of chancellor, then later Hindenburg died, so he dissolved the position of president, and thereafter what was remaining was my Führer, and therein lies the Nazi regime. But what is difference between fascism and Nazism is, Nazism still adds a certain idea of the other into the idea, which is the Jew. The Jews, the Gypsies, the idea of Jews, and therein lies the concept of creating an other. So Nazism is one step forward. Mussolini that way was not that aggressive, mostly useless when it came to battle, but Hitler was a monster, and Adolf Hitler that way used the fascist idea very well and took control over Germany, where people who were quite educated chose a monster, because when ultranationalism prevails, when anything and everything is about the honor of the nation, then you create others, and then a genocide of 60 lakh Jews was also in a way allowed. Now this is what is fascism. Now why am I having this discussion with you is because this rise of far right in Europe is the exact way in which it happened in Europe in 1920s, 30s also, which is far right parties becoming more and more decisive for the people. And therein lies the concept of neo-fascism. Now neo-fascism is the 21st century form of fascism, and the idea is still the same with 3 to 4 changes. First, ultra-nationalism now has been diluted. They are nationalistic, but they use the rhetoric of the nation quite a lot. But where they've actually changed their total agenda is, they're not anti-socialist now, because socialism is dead. So therefore there's no point of being an anti-socialist. Rather, they now have an agenda anti-immigration. The most important example of this, a pure neo-fascist in that regard, is Trump. The way it is going in America, he could also have a second term. Trump is a very good example of a neo-fascist, because he uses the rhetoric of making America great again, the nation, the rhetoric of nation, but at the same point of time, he is quite anti-immigration. The ban on the African and Saudi Arabia, the West Asian countries entering, the idea that he needs a border with a wall is needed to protect against immigrants, and over and above that, he also talks about a lot of things wherein he has a certain cult. The people, if you've ever seen, it's called Fingering the Pulse. It's a part of the Daily Show, and it talks, if you've ever seen any of these interactions or interviews of Trump supporters, you will realize how they sanitize history, how they in a way change the narrative itself. So anti-immigration, and they have their own cultic following of Trump, and anything and everything. That is why the whole concept of insurrection. When he did not come to power, there was an insurrection. They tried to take away democracy. That is why fascists generally tend to threaten democracy. So this anti-immigration agenda has now become very important. Therein also lies the others. And for them, the other is the illegal immigrant. And this has become very common in Europe now. France and across Germany, throughout Europe, because to the immigrant crisis, there was a lot of absorption of immigrants. The other here is the person who has come from Lebanon, who has come from Saudi Arabia, who has come from, for example, the Sudan sector, whoever is fleeing a conflict from Morocco. The idea is they are the others. The concept of charismatic leaders remains. For example, Le Pen is a very charismatic leader. She is followed by a lot of people. That way, in Italy also, Meloni is a far-right leader. She has a cultic phenomenon. She has her own following in that sense. Trump is the same. Putin is the same. A pure fascist nation today would be North Korea. But the idea is that they have and they are very good with media management. That is why they create the rhetoric or change the rhetoric very quickly. So neo-fascists are that way quite significant. Now there were 2 articles in the Hindu newspaper about this, which is what are the implications of France's Le Pen victory if it happens. And the fact of the matter is, the implications is, if far right parties are going to sweep Europe, the exact context was created before a war came in, and that was the Second World War, the bloodiest war of this world. I hope the last bloodiest war. The world has changed quite a lot from the non-nuclear world to a nuclear war, and nuclear warfare being a deterrent. But the point is that even the data which it is showing that with the rise of the far right, the people's opinion is also changing. Now people don't want to support Zelensky or Ukraine. There are a bigger percentage of people who are arguing that Putin is doing right for the nation, and therefore this is what is called the normalization of a fascist or neo-fascist party, wherein Putin's actions were first created an outcry. Now people say that no, he's doing the right thing. For his nation, he should take Ukraine. Now this is where you need to understand where we have to draw a line. In the name of the Russian nation, Putin is taking the whole Ukrainian sector, or is fighting in Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting vis-a-vis its own national identity. But the idea is, more people in Europe who used to generally hate Russia have now started to say that no, he's doing right. We should also have the same policy. We should also have the same policy. And therefore, this is a little bit of a concerning news for Europe specifically, at least. Is it true? Will it be true for Asia? Will it be true? I am not the one who is going to draw parallels. Neither does the article does it. But on the understanding of world history and what we do in class, this is something which we've seen previously. Nationalistic newspapers, nationalistic press. What happens is, if all these things converge, what we've seen previously, and this is where you have to learn from history, when we've seen far right parties rise, I'm not saying that Le Pen is a fascist, I'm not saying she's a neo-fascist, but she's a far right, she's a right-oriented, and right in Europe means a conservative oriented party. Whenever there are far right parties which become more and more what we call as attractive, plus when you have nationalistic press, plus you have the idea that one person can solve the problem, when there is a certain admiration for dictators, Putin is a dictator, and there's a certain issue that there's an other, which is the immigrant is the problem, that in turn creates a certain convergence of forces, and these forces have previously produced conflicts and wars. Let's hope that this leaning towards the far right, does not say that you go to the left. It means that the people have to choose in a way that they don't enable somebody who wants to use democracy to destroy democracy. Far right parties coming to power is not a problem. Right parties coming to power is not a problem. But within those far right parties and those right parties, there will be that one person who wants to enter democracy to destroy democracy. This is too familiar and similar to what had happened in Europe in 1920s, 30s and 40s. So let's see what happens in France. But for you and me, a question like this becomes quite interesting. You need to have an understanding of current affairs also, and you need to also have an understanding of the historical context, which is world history. The last time Europe leaned towards the far right, democracy was threatened in the continent. Elucidate. It is basically referring you to the interwar period, 1919 to 1933, 1939 period. Interwar period, democracy was threatened. A similar question came also previously. Hitler, Mussolini rose with the leaning towards the far right. And far right means extreme right. That is always dangerous in that sense. So I hope that this conversation gave you a little bit to understand also, a little bit of refreshing your memory with regards to world history. And over and above that, I also believe that, see, a historian's job is not to give a prophecy. It is not to predict the future. I can explain the present. A historian can explain the present. He can explain the past. He can recount the past. He's a storyteller. But the point is, if you don't learn from history, things repeat themselves. It has happened in multiple cases. A lot of historians, a lot of the civil society, a lot of think tanks are pointing this out. This is not my opinion, but an opinion which is building up, that the way actions which should have been condemned are being normalized is something which basically shifts the target. once the line is redrawn too many times, there will come a time that the line will be where 60 million or 60 lakh Jews, 6 million Jews had to lose their life because of gassing. So we cannot normalize genocide and allow another Hitler is not possible, but another conflict which is based on, then see, at the end of the day, even the world immigration, the idea is that we are dehumanizing the immigrants. At the end of the day, they are people. They are running away from conflict. They are running away from ecological impact. There has been profound impacts on the European countries because of immigration absorption, but that doesn't mean that we have a consequence when the next genocide is not of a race or an ethnicity, it is of immigrants, wherein they are not allowed or they are left in the spaces. They are not leaving their houses because they choose to do that. They are doing it because they are being compelled to do it. So do make sure that you understand this point, that the target as of right now is the immigrants, anti-immigrant idea. It doesn't mean that you don't have regulations, but it does mean that they have already chosen their other. When there is othering in society, it is much more easier to create a certain narrative which can be used against them. Okay, a long conversation, but I hope an interesting one for you. With that, we move to 3 small articles, but this one is a very interesting one. This is called Air Pollution Spikes May Raise Death Rates in Cities with Cleaner Air Says Study. Now, it's a Lancet study, that way it is quite interesting because Lancet always has very good articles. Now, try to understand something which the article is trying to say. I'll try to represent it graphically and it will make sense. See, what it is saying is that, for example, let's take an example of Bengaluru and Delhi. Now, as of right now, when we talk about air quality index is studied through the following parameters, which is PM 2.5, PM10, which is particulate matter, then nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, ammonia and lead. This is the Central Pollution Control Board has decided to see this, but particulate matter 2.5 is the most dangerous. We inhale it as we breathe and it has impacts on our pulmonary system. Now, when I talk about AQI levels, for example, if this is 10, 20, 30, this is an example, 50, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Now see, for a city like Bangalore, the AQI is quite stable and is good. For example, it has been at the level of 10. It has been at the level of 10. And for a city like Delhi, it is at least 4 times, 5 times higher. The baseline itself is quite high. Now, what the article points out and what the study points out is that if there is a certain spike in the AQI in Bangalore, for example, and there is a certain spike in the what we call as AQI of Delhi, this will produce more deaths than this. The mortality rate or the death rate increases more in Bangalore than in Delhi. And the reason is quite interesting. What they are arguing is because firstly the people are already accustomed to 40 and there is a plateauing very quickly and the stage of increase is lower. The people have a certain resistance, don't say resistance, but have a certain acclimatization to the air quality issues in Delhi. This is not a good thing, but the point is plateauing, when it is quite high and it plateaus, it will actually destabilize the mortality rate. But in Bangalore, what the argument, the Lancet report is saying is, in this phase, there will be massacre. The percentages will double because firstly the baseline was lower, people were not introduced to the AQI of 40 or 30 at that point of time, and vulnerable people in Delhi would have either taken precautions. Here vulnerability would not have been an issue, but now in the increasing phase there is a more dangerous chance of actually getting more mortality. So by the time it plateaus, the mortality would have been higher. So what it is saying is, because when there is a steeper curve or the increase is not even significant, but there is a higher AQI and people have no acclimatization to that form of AQI, there will be higher deaths. So the exact terminology it says is, see, it says have cleaner air. Indian cities which have cleaner air may raise death rates higher than in cities where they have higher pollution loads. So the risk of mortality rose more quickly at a lower PM level, but plateaued at levels when it increased. Meaning, when you are at a lower PM level and it starts to spike, people will be impacted here more. But if it plateaus and it is at 500, then the death rate will start to, in a way, ease down. This is a very interesting thing which they are pointing out, which is that the problem is not you are better off in Delhi or Bangalore. The question is that if Bangalore sees a spike, the death rate will be much higher. On the other hand, if Delhi sees a spike, they're already at a level which is quite high and people have acclimatization. This is the data doesn't really pertain to us, but this pattern does. Thus, the same increase in air pollution in, say, Bangalore may raise the death rates more than in Delhi, which has much higher levels of air pollution. So if you're already at 100%, then if you go to 110, it's okay. But if you are at 10% and you reach 50%, this is a very big increase. So there is the concept of relative increase and absolute increase is a very important point. So Lancet is pointing out that we need to also take this into account. We need to protect the cities which have not seen a spike in pollution, because if we see a spike in pollution in cities which have previously been a part of this what we call as low levels of PM, they will be impacted more. They will see a much bigger impact than the ones which don't have. So this question or this whole concept, we need further substantiation. Obviously, we need a bigger and better understanding, but it is also intersecting with the other patterns which are happening in China. But what is interesting is, for example, Greece, Japan and Spain, the mortality rate is, or the death rate is higher, because they have not historically seen a lot of pollution. But when the pollution is coming through, they are seeing a higher death rate. Basically, it's about the introduction. How much of your percentage of your population has been introduced to PM 2.5. If it is very low levels of PM 2.5, then the vulnerable section and the people who previously did not know that they have a problem with PM 2.5 will have a larger, more bigger and disastrous impact in that sense. That was quite an interesting study. But for you, I have a question. A simple one, but I want the answer to this question in the chat box tomorrow. We will discuss it, but I want the answer in the chat box, which is, which of the following pollutants is not included in the calculation of Air Quality Index AQI as per Central Pollution Control Board guidelines? Carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, ozone or arsenic? So just to refresh your memory, this is the relevant aspect. You just have to go through this and you will get the answer. So I want this in the chat box. I hope you will give the answer there. Thereafter, 3 simple topics. One, an extension of a very important project of this government, which is called Smart Cities Mission. And Smart Cities Mission, that was on paper has done very, very well. We don't know if we live in those cities where we can see the tangible impact. When we talk about Smart City Mission, the argument is that 90% of all the total projects which were named under Smart City Mission have been completed, and in the next 1 year, another 10% which is left will be completed. The Smart City Mission concept was that we create a city which is modern, has a lot of different amenities based on smart meters, ecologically monitoring solutions, effective public service tracking, smart lighting solutions, a safe city, water and green cities with proper balancing of what we call as traffic, and this city would then become a model city, would rub off on other cities also, and therefore there would be a chain reaction which would happen, a rippling effect, and this would become standard norm. So it was about creating model cities within bigger cities, for example Delhi, Bangalore, creating zones which are model, and that could be used to then illuminate or emanate in other sections. Now, what are the parameters? When we talk about the parameters, you have mixed modal access when it comes to smart mobility, which is that you can use multiple model or modes of transportation linked with the concept of information technology, Internet of Things. You have safe and healthy living. You have e-governance, where the government itself is monitoring everything through apps and the ICT projects. You have inclusive learning, a city which is inclusive. You have green buildings, and the economy itself is self-sustaining and green. The idea was we have to have sustainable cities which are smart cities based on ICT technology driven. Now, as I said, the update which is there is 90% of all these projects, 8,000 multi-modal projects had been taken up. Close to 7,188 have been completed, 90% completed. The government has increased has given the outlay further, and 10% of these projects will be completed in the next 1 year. So, an update for smart cities and the basic idea also discussed. With this, two very interesting developments. First, in Kerala, two major projects have actually failed. One is called the amphibious vessel hippo trip, it was called, wherein the bus used to be first on the roads, and then it used to go into the river as an amphibious vessel itself. And even the project related to seaplanes, both have not taken off. The argument which has been given in this article is that, see, there were two things which were under consideration. Post-COVID, a tourism spur or an increase in Kerala was expected, specifically in Kollam, Kochi and other important cities of Kerala. And the idea was, if we have unique projects which basically have a certain eye-catchy aspect, for example, the hippo trip or the concept of seaplanes, we would have a certain footfall in that sector. However, they have all been non-starters. The response has been really bad. And ironically, what has now been concluded is that the right approach was not taken when these projects were taken into consideration. Meaning, what they had just taken into consideration was that is it unique or not. A public testing, a social audit and the feasibility was not checked. And therein for you what is important is that both projects have not gone forward. But as an administrator, as a future IAS officer of this country, you should understand one thing, that because the Kochi University was taken into consideration, the select committees were taken, the question was incorrect. The right questions were not asked, and therefore it is now a burden on the public exchequer that 14 crore rupees has been lost over the seaplanes and similar amount of money on these buses. So, interesting, but something related to ethics. For ethics, do remember, stakeholders need to be taken into consideration, but audits and right questioning of the project is also important. Can't be like, I like it, it's nice, it's unique, but the people will like it and make it a part of their life is a separate issue altogether. The last topic is a development, which is the 46th UNESCO Heritage Panel is going to now meet in Delhi between 21st to 31st of July. Interesting thing, what are going to be the conclusions which are going to come through, we will see. I have just given you this as information because the location of these panels matter. So, the 46th one is going to happen in India, in Delhi, in Bharat Mandapam, and most probably our Prime Minister is going to inaugurate this. With this, I would like to end this session. Thank you so much for your patience. I will see you tomorrow with the answer to this question and along with another 6 to 7 different articles. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.